Hi everybody, my name is Andy. I'm a very grateful, recovered, definitely not cured alcoholic, and it's a privilege to be here again with you this week, continuing on through the big book. We are on page XVI. This is the foreword to the second edition. We got part way through it last week, so about halfway down the page. We've just been looking how the initial meeting sort of Bill and Bob, how this thing all came together from the initial tenets of the Oxford group. And then, so we're at prior to his journey. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic. But he had succeeded only in keeping himself sober. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realised that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician, and that was Dr. Bob Smith. This physician had repeatedly tried to spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered up never to drink again to the moment of his death in 1950, and I love this next sentence. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, not just work, strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. And I know whenever I look at that, I go, I know what I want. I came here to get permanent recovery. I don't want no temporary recovery, and so I have to work with others. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. And yeah, if there was one word I wish they'd slid in here, their very first successful case, because that's what Bill Dotson, who was alcoholic number 3, really was. They had attempted, Bill and Bob had tried working with two men prior to that. One was a guy called Dr. Roy McKay, and the other one was a guy called Eddie Riley. Eddie Riley did eventually go on to get sober. I don't know what happened with Dr. Roy McKay, but so they tried with those, but Bill Dotson was the first successful case, and he was the one that recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realised it at the time. And there's another little history note that they don't mention here, but there was a fourth AA called Ernie Gilbraith, Ernie G. And so when Bill went back to Akron, when it talks about him going back to Akron in 1935, there were actually 4 of them went back, and that was what put that first group together, even though they didn't even realise they were forming a group at the time. A second small group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland, and the third one in Cleveland was started by a guy called Clarence Schneider. And you can find Clarence Schneider writings, recordings, all sorts. And I love that Clarence Schneider was known as the brewmeister or something. He made his own alcohol. That's a dedicated alcoholic, isn't it? Beside these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York, who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. And the number of members with substantial sobriety time back then in 1937 was about 40. We can find that out from various history books that we have in AA. It was now time the struggling group sought to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women, It looks largely like it was 99 men and one woman. There might have been others on the sideline, but the main woman was Florence Rankin, who we owe an awful lot to, because it was her that spoke up. They were going to call this book 100 Men. That was one of the proposed titles. And she was the member. Thank goodness for minority opinion in group conscience. She was the one that said, hang on a minute, I'm a woman. And it became 100 Men and Women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Hammery Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval in the fall of 1939. Fulton Alsler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries to the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen travelling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. I just want to come back on that line that says, to their astonishment, it could be transmitted by mail as well as word of mouth. And the reason they said that back then, there was a brilliant case. There was a guy called Pat Cooper. And Pat, when the initial manuscripts were going out, Pat Cooper, I think his mum wrote to Alcoholics Anonymous after reading the article or something, or it might have been just, and they sent her an early manuscript. And it was before the first printing of the official big book came out. And she ended up sending it to her son, who got sober from reading it. And because he was a porter in a mental hospital, he realised that a lot of those people in the hospital were alcoholics, and he worked intensively with them, and that kept him sober. Now, his story's a bit of a funny one, because what happened, his story then got written up. We believe it wasn't written by him, his mum and somebody else helped him write it. He wasn't a great writer. Bill and Bob heard of this guy, because his mum wrote back and went, you'll never guess what, my son, who I thought was hopeless, he's got this thing, and they wanted to meet him. So they asked if he could get on a bus. He lived on the West Coast, and he did. He rode the bus all the way to New York to meet people, and Bill would have been there, Bob would have been there, there were some other, Hank Parkhurst and Fitz. Well, anyway, there was a few people waiting at the bus for this guy to get off, and he don't get off. And they go to the driver, and they say, is there anyone else on the bus? And he goes, yeah, just the one drunk at the back. Basically, this guy had relapsed on his way to New York. Now, his story does end well. He did end up getting sober, but obviously his story appeared in the first printing of the first edition of our book, and it's called The Lone Endeavour, and you can read it in the book Experience, Strength, Hope, where all the old stories are that I told you about last week. But I think it's a nice little... So that's why they're saying, oh, look, this seems to be working by mouth. We know that this works best intensively working with another alcoholic. And I know some people cling on to that. Well, they just got it by reading the book. Well, if you actually know the full history, yeah, he got sober, he relapsed, and then he worked intensively and was taken through the book with a mentor, what we now call a sponsor, and got sober. So that was Pat Cooper's story, and it's a great little reading experience, Strength and Hope as well. In the spring of 1940, Dr. John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires, inquiries poured in again, and many people went to bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. And we were helped massively. John D. Rockefeller, philanthropist, businessman, bought with quite a strong religious and moral background. I think his parents and were connected in some way to something like the Oxford Group or some organisation like that. And when he set out an invite, people went. Like, he was, But he sent out 187 invites, but because he told everyone, normally 187 people would have turned up, right? John D. Rockefeller gig. Yeah, I'm coming. Because he told them it was about alcoholism, only 75 out of those 187 turned up. 9 of them were AA members. But, isn't it beautiful that from them then sharing with those, that broke this out onto the world wires and everything else it tells us about there. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test it had faced was this. Could these large numbers of erstwhile, and that means former, that's another word for former, erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. And then the next sentence that's coming and the whole next paragraph is really a summary of the formation of our traditions. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve the principles by which the groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman should be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous and there were to be no professional class of therapy, there were to be no fees or dues, our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions, there was to be the least possible organisation, even in our service centres. Our public relations were to be based on attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV and films, and in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances or enter public controversies. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. Yeah, isn't that the truth? Wow. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance for AA grew in leaps and bounds. For this, there were 2 principal reasons. Reason number 1 is here, the large numbers of recoveries and reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the programme, but great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed, and that's something that we see so often in the rooms of AA. Now, when you see people come and go, and anything we share, those words stay with people. They go with them. That message goes with them. And when they're ready, they come back. I know I did. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends. Friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book, and they can be there in the appendices in the back. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organisation, neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as with the men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America and in distant lands. The same demographic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. And remember, that was in 1955. The last full survey that I think AA did was in 2014. And obviously not everyone would have answered and all of those sorts of things. At that point, 38% of our membership were women. 10 years on since that, and with COVID and the growth of Zoom and everything else, and when you look around, it could be close to 50-50, but until we do another survey, who knows. At present, our membership is pyramiding by the rate of about 20% a year. So far, upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. And I love that they were humble and they knew that. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcoholic problem and all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. Yet it is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book, and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom. And that's the end of the foreword to the second edition. We flip over the page. Now we have to remember that in 1971 Bill died, and you can see the difference now, because the foreword to the second would have been largely penned by Bill and then edited, tidied up and whatever. At this point Bill dies in 1971, so the foreword to the third edition is quite a lot shorter, and the tone of it's a little bit different. It really is just filling us in on some of the little bit of growth that's happened. So I'm just going to read through this. I don't have a lot to expand on this particular one, but the numbers are interesting. By March 1976, when this edition went to the printer, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Wow, can you know, in just that space of time, that growth. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women now make up more than 1/4, so we're at 25% back then, of the membership. Among newer members, the proportion is nearly 1/3. 7% of the AA surveyed are less than 30 years of age, among them many in their teens. And it's good that we're still seeing young teens get this today. I once had the absolute privilege of watching a 13-year-old picking up a 3-year chip. It just makes you... The basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. The 12 steps that summarise the program may be called, I don't do accents or foreign languages, so here we go, Los 12 Pasos in one country, Les 12 Étapes in another, but they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. In spite of the great increase in the size and the span of this fellowship, at its core remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength and hope. And that's why we continue to share our experience, strength and hope. Where are we on time? I am going to read, because again, I don't have loads to talk about on the forward to the fourth. It's a lot. There's some really good stuff in it. We'll read through it, and then that way we can start next week on the doctor's opinion. So, forward to the fourth edition. This is the fourth edition of Alcoholics Anonymous. Came off the press in November 2001, at the start of a new millennium. Since the third edition was published in 1976, world membership of AA has just about doubled. So it was 1 million then, it was 2 million here then, to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. So we'd reached another 60 odd countries by then. Amazing. Literature has played a major role in AA's growth, and a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where the AA seed was planted, it has taken root, slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. Currently, Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages. As the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the lives of vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, "we are people who normally would not mix," page 17 of this book, was written in 1939, it referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and a few women, with quite similar social, ethnic and economic backgrounds. Most of them were white Anglo-Saxon men, and most of them had reasonable positions in society as well. Like so much of AA's basic text, those words have proved far more visionary than the founding members could ever have imagined. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race and culture have widened and have deepened to encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. And that's what's so beautiful about this. When you read our stories in the back of the big book, you'll find people in there of every gender, race, belief, non-belief, sexuality. None of that matters. And who knows what stories will be in our 5th edition now that way things have grown and moved on since this was written. While our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, and that was, again, remember we talked about that in the foreword to the first and how important sweeping changes in the society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship, taking advantage of technological advances. For example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world. Fundamentally, though, the difference between an electronic meeting and the home group around the corner is only one of format. And you think this was written in 2001, like internet-based meetings back then, you had bulletin boards, like forum type things. There were some online chat systems and group chat systems that would have existed, and 1 or 2 people might have had voice over IP. Nowadays we can just turn on our computer and we've got full-blown video. Aren't we lucky? In any meeting, anywhere, and I love this, AAs share experience, strength and hope with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics. Modem to modem, or face to face, AA speaks the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity. And that is what we do, isn't it? That's why we come to these meetings and we share our experience, strength and hope on how this miraculous program has saved us from an incurable illness. And that, I don't know, if that's not a miracle, what is? And that is the message I hope we get to pass today, and that we do get to share in these messages, that recovery is possible. You don't have to ever drink again. I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm just going to say what I always say at the end of a share. If you're new, back off a slip. Please don't muck around with this. It's life and death. Get a big book, get a sponsor, get yourself well, become the best version of you there is, which is a version of you the God of your understanding wants you to be. Thanks so much for letting me share it. Genuinely is an honour to do this.